Wyoming. The coldest night of the winter came down hard on Coldwater Bend. Chimneys burned through the last of their stacked wood. Men fed wet logs into stoves. Women wrapped children in quilts and listened to the wind push at the walls. Firelight flickered low. Fuel was running out fast. Yet a mile above town, beneath a granite slope buried in snow, former Navy SEAL Dawson Reed sat inside steady warmth. Fresh greens still grew under lamplight. Clean water moved through a stone channel. Heat rested in the walls and gave itself back slowly. Nothing in that hidden farm was wasted. Nothing was loud. Down below, people had laughed for months. They called him the fool under the mountain, the hermit with dirt walls, the man who chose rock over neighbors. Then the blizzard sharpened. Wind screamed through the pines. Snow erased the trail in minutes. Coda, the dog that never wasted motion, sprang to his feet. He ran into the white dark without waiting for command. Seconds stretched, then he returned. Behind him stumbled a small boy, half frozen, barely standing. Dawson caught the child before he hit the floor. He turned toward the warm stone bench, then stopped cold, because on the shelf behind him sat an old photograph of another child. Same age, same frightened eyes. And the reason Dawson built everything under that mountain was about to be dragged back into the light. If you value grit, old wisdom, and stories proven by hardship, subscribe now and stay with this one. 2 days earlier, Coldwater Bend still believed it understood winter. The town sat low beneath the Absaroka Range, where ridgelines held snow long after spring should have claimed them. It was a small place built by stubborn hands. Ranchers kept cattle on narrow pasture. Millmen cut timber when roads stayed open. Storekeepers survived on short summers and long memories. Hard seasons had shaped the people there. Because of that, many mistook endurance for control. They had seen blizzards before. They had buried pipes before. They had thawed doors, patched roofs, and carried wood in darkness. So they assumed this winter would bow to the same old habits. Smoke rose steady from chimneys across Main Street. The general store door swung open and shut all morning. Men laughed beside the potbelly stove. Women traded flour, lamp oil, and weather talk. Children chased each other through packed snow until mothers called them back inside. Above it all, the sky hung low and gray, like iron waiting to fall. A few older faces noticed the strange stillness in the air. No crows crossed the valley. Dogs barked less than usual. Wind moved high along the ridges, but not down in town. Still, no one changed routine. No one stacked extra wood. No one cut fresh kindling. No one asked whether past luck had been mistaken for wisdom. The town was calm, warm enough, busy enough, certain enough, and the mountains said nothing yet. Dawson Reed was the kind of man small towns often judged too quickly. He was somewhere past 40, broad through the shoulders, lean through the waist, and built like someone who had spent years carrying weight without complaint. His face was weathered more by wind than age. A scar crossed one knuckle. Another sat pale near the jawline. He never explained either one. People in Coldwater Bend knew only the headline version of him. Former Navy SEAL. Came west alone. Bought an abandoned patch of slope land no one wanted. Started hauling stone, lumber, clay, and pipe uphill by himself. Everything after that became rumor. Some said he had money buried somewhere. Some said war had left him strange. Others said men who preferred solitude usually had something to hide. Dawson answered none of it. He came to town rarely. When he did, he moved like a man who already knew where every door, alley, and ridgeline stood. He bought what he needed: lamp oil, salt, hinges, seed packets, nails by count, not by guess. He spoke only when speech improved the task. Then he left. There was no swagger in him, no hunger to impress, no interest in being liked. To many, that looked cold. To older eyes, it looked like discipline. He noticed weather before weather arrived. He glanced once at the clouds, once at the ridge tops, once at the drift lines beside fences. That was usually enough. Men in town called him odd because they had no better word for someone who did not ask for approval. and Dawson Reed never spent a minute correcting them. Coda always moved at his side, close enough to brush Dawson's leg, silent enough to seem made of shadow when the light was low. The dog was a strong male with a dark coat, sharp ears, and the hard attention of an animal that believed every sound mattered until proven otherwise. He did not bark to hear himself bark. He did not beg. He did not wander. When he stood still, he looked carved. Children loved him first. They would stop across the street and whisper his name. Some dared wave. Coda never rushed toward them, but his tail would tap once against the snow. That was enough to make them grin. Adults were less certain. They admired him from a distance, the way people admire tools they do not know how to use. They could tell he was trained. They could also tell he answered to one man alone. If Dawson turned left, Coda turned left before the command finished. If Dawson stopped, Coda stopped. If Dawson watched a ridgeline, Coda watched it too. They walked like two creatures used to, depending on each other. In places where mistakes were expensive. No one in town knew where they had been before Wyoming. No one knew what nights they had already survived. But the dog knew, and the dog trusted Dawson completely. What Dawson Reed lived in was not a cave, and it was not a shack. It was a system cut into stone. Years earlier, trappers had used the granite shelf as a crude storage hollow. Dawson found the old cavity, studied the slope above it, then spent 26 months turning dead space into shelter. He drove the rooms deeper into the hillside where frost moved slower and wind had less authority. Timber framed the front wall. Stone carried the weight behind it. Earth did the rest. Inside, the air felt steady, not hot, not stale, steady. Along one wall sat growing beds built waist-high from rough pine planks. Kale rose thick and dark beneath polished reflector lamps. Winter spinach spread low and dense in neat rows. Trays of sprouts waited on shelves above them, ready in days, not months. Nothing decorative, everything edible. Bundles of onions hung drying from rafters. Sage leaves cured on string lines near the warm wall. Jars of beans, salt, and rendered fat were stacked by date, not by chance. Near the back ran a narrow stone channel where clear water moved day and night from a seep line inside the mountain. It passed first through gravel, then sand, then charcoal packed in cedar boxes before reaching a covered basin. Even in January, it did not freeze. Beside it sat a shallow rock tank where brook trout moved through slow circulating water. They flashed silver when the lamplight touched them. Protein stored alive required no smokehouse, and no guessing. Dawson preferred systems that kept working while a man slept. Further in stood bins of potatoes, beets, and turnips, packed in dry sand. Moisture stayed controlled. Rot stayed low. Losses were measured, not mourned. Coda moved through it all, without bumping a single crate or brushing a tray. He knew the paths as well as Dawson did. Nothing there was luxurious. Nothing there was accidental. Tools hung where the hand expected them. Fuel sat dry. Water ran clean. Food renewed itself. Men in town called it strange, because they had never seen order built this far ahead of need. But if winter had eyes, it would have recognized something else entirely. Preparation. The smartest thing in Dawson Reed's shelter did not glow, roar, or impress visitors. It ran along the main wall like a plain stone bench, 32 feet from end to end, built from slate, red clay, river sand, and patience. Men in town would have called it oversized furniture. They would have been wrong. Inside that mass of stone and earth, hidden from sight, a line of ceramic flue pipe wound back and forth before reaching the outside stack. At the near end sat a low cast-iron firebox, no larger than an old tool chest. It took 2 split logs, sometimes 3 in deep cold, and no more than that. Dawson would light the charge, close the draft, and let the flame burn hot and clean. Heat did not rush upward and disappear the way it did in most stoves. It traveled sideways first. It moved through the buried pipe, surrendered itself to the clay and slate, then continued on cooler and slower toward the chimney. By the time smoke reached open air, much of its value had already been claimed. The wall absorbed warmth the way dry ground takes rain. Then, hour after hour, It gave that warmth back gently into the room. No wild swings. No blazing heat near the stove, and frozen corners 10 feet away. No waking at midnight to feed a greedy iron box. Coda often slept against the far end, where the stones stayed warm longest. Dawson sometimes read there with a lantern turned low, while outside wind scraped at the front wall and found nothing careless to exploit. Most men in Coldwater Bend believed winter was beaten by cutting more wood, hauling more wood, burning more wood. They fought cold with effort alone. Dawson fought it with memory. He knew heat made too fast was often heat wasted fast. He knew a roaring fire could still lose to a bad room. He knew the cheapest cord of wood was the one never needed. So while others trusted noise and flame, he trusted mass, time, and direction. A small fire, a warm wall, a long night handled quietly. By late afternoon, the warmest place in Coldwater Bend was the general store. Boots thawed there, news spread there, so did foolishness. The potbelly stove glowed red at the center of the room, while men leaned back in chairs, worn smooth by winter talk. When Dawson Reed stepped through the door, cold air followed him in, and every head turned the way heads always turn when a town has already decided what a man is. Harlan Pike laughed first. He was a broad cattle rancher whose voice usually arrived before the rest of him. "Well now," Harlan said, slapping a knee. The Mountain King came down among common folk. A few chuckles followed. Vernon Sloat added the sharper edge. He kept the mill engines alive most seasons, and believed sarcasm counted as intelligence. "Tell us this," Vernon said. "You growing oranges under the dirt yet, or still just weeds?" More laughter. Toby Rusk laughed too. A young ranch hand eager to belong to whatever side sounded strongest. Dawson gave none of them a glance worth keeping. He walked to the counter, set down a short list, and waited. Lamp wicks, onion seed, 1/4-inch screws, 2 pounds of salt. That was all. No defense, no irritation, no performance. Edna Harrow, who had run the store long enough to know noise often covered weakness, gathered the items in silence. Her hands moved steady across paper sacks and scales. She did not join the room's amusement. Harlan leaned back again. "Still hiding in that dirt hole when the real cold comes?" Dawson placed folded bills on the counter. "Still warm there now." It was the only sentence he gave them. The room laughed again, but thinner this time. Dawson took the sack and turned for the door. Coda rose beside him without command. Some men argue because they need victory. Some men stay quiet because they already know where truth will be settled. Outside, the mountain waited. As Dawson turned to leave, his coat opened for a moment. Edna Harrow saw the corner of an old photograph tucked inside the inner pocket. It showed a young girl, no more than 8, with a bright ribbon in her hair and the easy smile children wear before they learn what winter can take. Dawson noticed the slip at once and closed the coat with one calm hand. He said nothing. Neither did Edna. But the room changed for her in that instant. The jokes sounded smaller. The laughter sounded cheap. She understood what the others did not. Some men live apart because they despise people. Others do it because grief rearranged the map of their lives. Edna watched him walk into the cold and knew this was not a story about oddness at all. It was a story about something buried deep enough to stay hidden. That night, Dawson placed the photograph back on the stone shelf above the warm wall. Coda settled at the base of the bench, one ear still turned toward the outer door. The shelter held its quiet heat. Water moved softly through the channel. Lamplight rested low across the room. Dawson stood there longer than usual. He studied the face in the picture as if memory might change if given enough time. Lily May looked forever caught in one bright afternoon, untouched by what came after. He finally spoke, so quietly the room almost kept the words. "Don't let this year repeat itself." Outside, the wind shifted north. Snow began to sweep across the slope in thin white lines, testing the ground before claiming it. Some men pray in churches. Some pray with tools, walls, and years of labor. Dawson Reed had done both. Morning came without sunrise. The sky dropped low over Coldwater Bend, flat and dark like a cast-iron lid set over the valley. Light never fully arrived. It only thinned the darkness enough for people to see trouble coming. By noon, wind began to move hard along the ridges. By afternoon, it found the streets. Then it did not stop. It rose into one long howl that bent around corners, slipped through barn slats, and shook loose snow from every roof edge in town. The North Road vanished first. Fence lines disappeared next. Drifts formed across wagon ruts so fast a man could watch the path die in front of him. Ranchers hurried livestock into sheds. Stable doors slammed. Chains rattled. Men cursed frozen latches and worked faster than they wanted others to notice. Still, many called it temporary. Big blow. Nothing more. Seen worse in '09. By tomorrow, it'll pass. Confidence is loudest, right before it learns something. Up on the granite slope, Dawson Reed wasted no motion arguing with weather. He topped off the trout tank. He checked the sand filters and cleared one block screen. He tightened the outer hinges, then ran rope braces across the storm door. He stacked extra split wood beside the firebox where it would stay dry. He moved 2 water buckets closer to the warm wall. Coda followed every pass, quieter than usual, pausing often to listen toward the entrance. By dusk, chimney smoke in town no longer rose upward. It tore sideways across the rooftops. Loose boards slapped against sheds. A shutter broke free somewhere below and went tumbling unseen into the white. Inside the shelter, lamplight held steady. Heat remained in the wall. Water kept moving. Tools stayed where they belonged. Outside, the mountain had entered the courtroom, and it had begun calling names. The first full night of the storm struck the mountain hard. Wind hammered the slope like fists on ship planks. Snow hit the outer wall in bursts, then in sheets, then in solid force. Inside the shelter, the warm wall still held steady heat. Water still moved through the stone channel. Dawson was checking the feed gate on the trout tank when Coda froze. One ear lifted, then the other. His whole body narrowed toward the outer door. He did not bark. He listened first, judged second. Then he sprang forward. Dawson needed no explanation. The dog had never wasted movement in his life. He took his parka from the peg, grabbed the storm lantern, and unbarred the door. White darkness rushed in. Coda was already gone into it. Dawson stepped after him without a word. Outside, the world had been erased. Coda drove through the drift line and stopped beneath a pine bent sideways by the wind. Then he began clawing at the snow with frantic force. Dawson dropped to one knee and swept the powder aside with both arms. A small face appeared. Pale skin. Blue lips. One bare hand curled against a coat too thin for the night. It was Noah Bell, 8 years old, half buried and fading fast. The boy's eyes opened only part way. His voice came out broken by cold. I thought. Nobody saw me. For one brief second, Dawson saw another child in another storm. Then the moment was gone. He wrapped Noah inside his own coat, lifted him against his chest, and turned back toward the hidden shelter. Behind them, their tracks vanished almost as soon as they were made. Dawson carried Noah inside and shut the storm out behind him. He laid the boy along the warm stone bench, not near the firebox, but at the far middle where the heat stayed even and steady. Sudden heat could shock a body already losing the fight. Dawson knew that. Panic made men foolish long before cold finished them. He worked in order. Wet boots off first, socks next. He rubbed the boy's feet dry with rough cloth, then wrapped them in warmed wool kept beside the wall for nights exactly like this. Gloves off. Sleeves checked, fingers flexed one by one, to be sure they still answered. Noah shivered so hard the bench trembled beneath him. That was better than silence. Shivering meant the body had not surrendered yet. Dawson filled a metal cup with hot water from the kettle. He stirred in a spoon of honey and a pinch of salt, then cooled it enough to drink. He raised the cup slowly to the boy's lips. Small sips, no rush, no waste. Coda climbed onto the floor beside the bench and pressed himself against Noah's legs, adding the oldest form of heat there was living warmth. Steam rose from the cup. Lamplight touched the stone wall. The room held steady. Outside, wind clawed at the mountain and found nothing careless to punish. Inside, color began returning to Noah's cheeks by degrees, so small, only a patient eye would notice. His breathing deepened. His hands loosened. The tight line of fear across his face slowly gave way to exhaustion. Dawson checked the boy's pulse once more, then covered him with a blanket to the chin. His own hands never shook. Many men admire bold action. Fewer understand the value of calm sequence. The warm wall gave back the heat it had stored all day, and a child who had nearly slipped away began making the long, quiet journey back. Morning came gray and mean. The storm had weakened only enough to show the damage it meant to continue. Snow lay deep across Coldwater Bend, packed hard in some places, loose as flour in others. Roof edges sagged. Fence posts had become white stumps. Caleb Bell, Noah's father, was already in the saddle before first light. He rode with 3 other men until the drifts grew too deep for the horses to break through. Then they dismounted and led the animals on foot, fighting for every step uphill. Miriam Bell, Noah's mother, went with them as far as the lower rise. She wore 2 coats, but the cold still cut through to her bones. She stopped only when the slope ahead became too steep and dangerous. She stood there, one gloved hand pressed to her mouth, watching the men grow smaller in the blowing snow. Edna Harrow came too, wrapped in an old brown coat, saying little. Some people help best by carrying tools. Others help by noticing what panic misses. That morning, she was the sharpest set of eyes among them. Near the edge of the pine line, Edna bent and pointed. There in the fresh snow ran 2 tracks side by side. One was the deep mark of a man in winter boots. The other was the clean, powerful print of a large dog moving with purpose, not wandering, leading, returning. Caleb dropped to one knee and touched the print with bare fingers. Hope arrived all at once, and it looked like tracks heading uphill. No one needed to say whose dog it was. They tightened their coats, gripped the lead ropes, and followed the path toward the mountain. The outer door opened before Caleb could knock twice. Warm air rolled out and struck their faces so suddenly that several men stopped where they stood. After hours in cutting wind, the heat felt almost unreal. Then they stepped inside. No one spoke at first. Rows of green plants grew under yellow lamplight where bare stone should have been. Water moved through a narrow channel with the calm sound of summer. A shallow tank flashed silver as trout turned beneath the surface. Crates were stacked cleanly. Tools hung in order. Nothing sagged. Nothing leaked. Nothing begged to be repaired. It was not a cave. It was a working home. At the center of it, wrapped in a wool blanket and holding a tin bowl of thin soup with both hands, sat Noah Bell. Color had returned to his face. His eyes were clear again. "Pa!" The bowl hit the bench before the word finished. Caleb crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees, pulling the boy against him so hard the blanket slipped loose. Noah clung back with all the strength he had left. Men who had braced for the sight of death now watched life hold on instead. Behind them, Dawson Reed stood near the water channel, giving father and son the center of the room as if it belonged there. Coda sat beside him, calm, watchful, needing no praise. The search party slowly turned in place, taking in every wall, every shelf, every careful decision they had mocked from a distance. The place they had called foolish was warm, fed, lit, dry. Outside, their own homes were losing ground by the hour. Noah looked up from his father's shoulder and pointed toward Dawson. "He made me warm again." While Caleb still held his son, Edna's eyes moved to the stone shelf above the warm wall. There it was again. The same old photograph she had glimpsed in Dawson's coat pocket the day before. A little girl with ribboned hair smiling into sunlight that no longer existed. Caleb followed her gaze. He rose slowly, one hand still on Noah's shoulder. "Who is she?" he asked, not loudly. The room grew still in a different way than before. Even the men who knew nothing sensed they had stepped near something private and costly. Dawson looked at the photograph for a long moment before answering. "Lily May," he said. "My brother's girl." His voice did not crack. That made it heavier. "Years ago," he explained. Her family had been crossing a ridge road in late winter. Weather turned fast. Whiteout swallowed the trail. The wagon slid where the markers vanished. By the time word reached him, and he fought his way up there, the mountain had already finished its work. No one asked for details. They were not needed. Everyone in that room knew what cold could do when it met delay. Dawson had buried her, left the life he knew, and come west carrying one thought that would not release him. There should have been somewhere warm between town and death, somewhere stocked, somewhere ready before anyone asked for it. So he found this slope. He studied the rock, the runoff, the wind lines, the frost depth. Then he built for years where others joked for minutes. "I didn't come here to hide," he said. "I came here to keep watch." His hand rested on the back of the stone bench, still warm from stored fire. "If another child got caught out here..." He paused once. I wanted Cold to lose the final say. No one in the room looked at him the same after that. The place they had mistaken for withdrawal was duty built in timber, clay, and stone. A shelter can be made from walls. This one had been made from grief. The next 3 days did what talk never could. The blizzard tightened over Coldwater Bend and kept tightening. Roads were no longer blocked. They were gone. The north supply route disappeared under drifted walls of snow higher than wagon roofs. Fence lines vanished. Marker posts snapped. Men who knew every turn of the valley could no longer trust 10 yards ahead of them. Then the town began to fail in pieces. 2 water lines burst before dawn on the second day. Families carried buckets from hand pumps and prayed the handles would still move. A livestock shed on the south edge lost half its roof in the night. By morning, 3 calves lay stiff beneath the broken beams. Vernon Sloat's machine shop froze solid enough that wrenches stuck to bare skin. For once, he had no remarks to offer. Inside homes across town, stoves still burned, but with poorer fuel every hour. Dry wood was gone first, then split fence rails, then damp scrap, then green boards no one should have burned at all. Smoke rose thinner from the chimneys, not because warmth had returned, but because wood had nearly run out. By the 3rd afternoon, the general store became less a business than a council chamber. Faces looked gray in the stove light. Gloves stayed on indoors. No one laughed much now. Harlan Pike stood near the back, shoulders lowered. Vernon stared at the floorboards. Others counted quietly how many nights of fuel remained. Then Caleb Bell rose. Snow still clung to his coat hem. He looked around the room once, long enough for discomfort to settle where pride used to sit. "My son is alive," he said, "because of the place you all laughed at." No one answered. Caleb's voice hardened. "While we were joking, that man was building water, heat, food, and shelter. While we were talking, he was getting ready." The stove popped once. That was the only sound. Winter had begun with weather. Now it had moved into judgment. By late that same day, a line of townspeople was climbing the mountain. They carried what little pride allowed them to disguise as usefulness. Blankets, a sack of flour, salt pork wrapped in cloth, a crate of candles, 2 split handles for tools no one had asked to repair. What weighed most, however, could not be seen. It was the burden of needing help from the man they had dismissed. Harlan Pike walked in front. For the first time anyone could remember, he had almost nothing to say. The wind took his hat twice, and he cursed only once. Vernon Sloat came behind him, shoulders hunched, boots slipping where the path narrowed. Others followed in silence, heads down against the blowing snow. No one joked on that climb. The mountain had a way of stripping conversation down to what could survive cold air. When they reached the timber front of Dawson Reed's shelter, no one knocked at first. They stood breathing hard, looking at the rope-braced door, at the chimney giving off only a thin, honest stream of smoke, at the drift packed high against the wall. Then Coda barked once from inside. Bolts slid back. The door opened inward. Warmth touched their faces before words did. Dawson stood there in lamplight, one hand still on the latch. He said nothing. He looked past them first, down over the valley buried in white. Then he looked at each face in turn. Harlan. Vernon. Men who had laughed. Men who had listened to laughter. Men who had done neither but followed anyway. No accusation showed on him. No eagerness either. Only judgment held in reserve. Snow hissed across the rocks behind them. No one met his eyes for long. In that narrow doorway stood the one man with the right to refuse. And everyone there knew it. Dawson let the silence hold one moment longer. Then he stepped aside. Bring the children in first. That was all. No lecture. No tally of insults. No request for apologies paid in public. Just an order shaped by priority. The line moved at once. Mothers guided little ones through the doorway. Older men carried blankets and baskets behind them. Women helped the elderly over the threshold where packed snow met dry floorboards. The room filled with steam from wet coats and the stunned look people wear when they expected judgment and found mercy instead. Children gathered first near the long, warm wall, stretching cold hands toward the stone without quite touching it. They smiled when they felt heat coming from rock. To them, it was magic. To Dawson, it was stored fuel and patient design. Abigail Wren, the widowed schoolteacher, took command the way competent people often do without announcing it. She set the youngest near the warmest section, paired older children with smaller ones, hung wet mittens on lines near the rear vent, and turned crates into seats within minutes. Fear became order under her hands. Coda lay in the middle of the room, head on his paws, no longer watching the door with hard suspicion. The pack had changed. The room was safe now. More people entered. More frost melted from shoulders. The stone bench kept giving back the fire it had banked for hours. Soup pots were set on the small stove. Bread was cut thin and shared evenly. At last, Harlan Pike walked over. His hat stayed in both hands. "I laughed at the wrong man," he said quietly. Dawson studied him once, then reached beside the firebox and handed him a coal shovel. "Then help feed the heat." Harlan took it like a sentence and a gift at the same time. No crowd cheered. No one needed to. The man they had mocked now directed the only shelter in the valley, still fully alive. On the fifth morning, the wind finally tired. It did not stop all at once. It weakened in stages, as if even the storm disliked surrender. The long howl fell to gusts. The gusts fell to restless drafts. Then, for the first time in days, a silence spread across Coldwater Bend that sounded almost unfamiliar. Cloud cover thinned by degrees. A pale shaft of sunlight broke through the lead-colored sky and touched the upper ridges first, then the buried roofs below. Men stepped outside and blinked at the brightness. Women opened doors to air out rooms that still smelled of damp wool and smoke. Children, who recover faster than adults, were already laughing in snowbanks higher than fence rails. The town was still standing, but everyone knew why. Through the 5 worst nights of the year, families had slept, eaten, and stayed warm inside the place they once called foolish. Old grudges had thawed beside that stone wall. Hungry people had shared soup there. Proud men had taken turns hauling water and feeding coals. More than one child had fallen asleep against Coda's side. When people looked uphill that morning, they noticed something before anything else. The first honest column of smoke was rising from the granite slope, not from Main Street, not from the largest ranch house, not from the mill, from the hidden shelter under the mountain. Dawson Reed asked for no statue, no speech, no thanks. He was already outside checking roof braces, clearing the vent cap, and studying the next weather line forming far beyond the ridge. Some men celebrate being proven right. Others simply return to work. Coldwater Bend had learned a hard lesson in the language winter uses best. There are people who get laughed at because they prepare too early, until the day everyone else discovers they prepared exactly on time. If they had mocked the Navy SEAL's hidden farm in your town, how long do you think it would have taken them to admit he was right?